Friends, welcome to the India Power Talk. India Power Talk is a knowledge sharing initiative. We invite international thought leaders and domain experts to share their insights, experiences, and strategies related to business and the economy. The result is an easily accessible digital source of knowledge that benefits not only Indian entrepreneurs and policymakers, but also international businesses, investors, and strategic partners who have invested in or intend to invest in India. Our speakers include entrepreneurs, economists, professors, investment bankers, inventors, scientists, lawyers, chartered accountants, and other senior professionals with experience in diverse sectors. Today, we will explore India's economy and growth opportunities in international trade. India is a highly diverse country in terms of both its culture and economy. It's a land of extremes with the high-end tech expertise concentrated in Bangalore and Pune, financials in Mumbai. However, large areas remain agrarian. While the middle class are growing rapidly, there can be no denying that poverty is still a major problem. International trade continues to be a huge driver of increasing affluence and well-being across the country. We need to ask how to best shape education and business to ensure maximum benefit to all Indians, including women and unrepresented groups. As the current pandemic makes painfully clear, inequality is a systemic risk to health and economic growth. That's why it's so important to cultivate inclusive and vibrant business when we emerge from this situation and focus on recovery. We have the privilege of welcoming a guest who is extraordinarily well qualified to talk about this important topic. Adrian Mutton, CEO and founder of Sannam S4, a leading international market entry and expansion practice that brings international investors, companies, and universities to India. Adrian looks back on decades of experience in India. Adrian began his academic career as a scholar of urban planning, gender and development, and population studies. In 1993, at the age of just 19, he set up his first business in India, which brought international students to the country for experiential tours. In 1992-93, Adrian taught economics and English at a public school in Saharanpur, Uttar Pradesh. He then went on to work with the Delhi Development Authority, DDA, Slum and Juggi Jhopri Division, advising on the resettlement of urban slum dwellers to new purpose built up townships and upgrading inner city settlements, where he also developed Mahila Mandal's Women Working Group Entrepreneurship Program. Leveraging his previous experiences, Sannam S4 was founded in 2008. The firm was awarded UK India Consulting Firm of the Year by India Inc. in 2018 and 2019 in recognition of the impact it has on bilateral business ties between the two countries. When the pandemic struck last year, Adrian reimagined Sannam S4's future, invested in its human capital and talent development, increased the workforce by 20%, and led the company through continued double-digit growth. Welcome, Adrian. It's pleasure to have you on India Power Talk. At the outset, I would like to thank you. First of all, I thank you for the incredible work that you've done in India. And thank you so much for taking time to join me on India Power Talk. Adrian, please could you begin by talking about what drew you to India and the early experiences you had in this country?
Nitin, thank you very much for that kind and warm welcome. I'm delighted to be part of your India Power Talk and grateful for the opportunity of sharing what has now been a 30-year history of a very, very close association with India. And at this particular time, my thoughts are with you and all of the Indian population with a very difficult time that you're going through with COVID-19. So my journey with India began as a starry-eyed 14-year-old at school in Oxford in England. And as part of a geography lesson, we were shown a video of the busties of Calcutta, the urban slum dwellings in Calcutta. And what struck me through this hour-long video was the intensity of entrepreneurialism, innovation, and the coexistence of people from so many different backgrounds who are not only able to thrive in their own very densely populated communities, but they were also a significant contributor to the metropolis of Calcutta. And at that point, and I still remember sitting down watching that video, I was captured by India's vibrancy and said to myself, at the earliest possible opportunity, I'm going to find a way of being part of that story. And so it wasn't until I left school in the July of 1992, finished my A-level exams, took a year off before university, and within weeks I was on a plane and flying to New Delhi. So as I was approaching the end of my high school years, I started writing to organizations in India, a combination of non-profits, government organizations, businesses, and of course, these were the days before email. So I was writing letters and hoping that they would come back in some shape, form or another. And one day I received this wonderful letter on the doorstep from the Joshi family, the owners and principal of the public school in Saharanpur, and they said, we'd love to have you come and teach. And of course, that was an opportunity I couldn't resist.
My God, I would like to really know more, Adrian, because I know your passion for teaching, and I would like to little bit know. I'm sure my audience would like to little bit know more about your teaching experience in Saharanpur, and from there when you went from Delhi to Goa, and you decided to learn Hindi. You sold tea in the train. I read all about you. So could you please narrate those interesting incidents, that will really inspire the young generation today sitting and watching to you in India?
Thank you. Yes, you bring back some very fond memories there, as well as some quite scary ones. So I arrived in Saharanpur having been told by the Royal Society of Asian Affairs that Saharanpur was at the foothills of the Himalayas. It had a beautiful river flowing through it, a fine botanical gardens, a thriving wood market, and a bustling industry, and the best mangoes in India. So that was on the basis that I accepted this offer and thought I was heading to paradise. And I still look fondly as Saharanpur as being my first adult home. But of course, the realities when I arrived there were somewhat different. So I wrote back to the society and said, well, I'm not quite sure where you got your information from, but let me give you an update on Saharanpur. The Himalayas have moved 500 miles. The river is a bubbling cesspit. The wood market is decrepit. The botanical gardens have been shut for 50 years, but the mangoes are still absolutely delicious. And of course, I wrote this letter back, and then a month or so later, they wrote back and said, yes, well, we got our information on Saharanpur from the Journal of the Royal Society in 1892, so 100 years prior to that. Just as a side anecdote, I was delighted to see pictures in the Indian Express last year of the positive effect, if there are any, of COVID and the pollution decreasing. And for the first time, people in Saharanpur being able to see the snowy mountain tops of the Himalayas. So at one point, that dream has been fulfilled. But I arrived in Saharanpur in the summer of 1992. And firstly, as a young man on his own from Oxford, I'm faced with arriving in Delhi Airport, which in those days was very different to the glorious airport that it is these days. And there were 1,000 hawkers trying to offer me accommodation and travel and trips. And apparently my hotel had burnt down, or it had been, demolished, or, the person that was here to meet me wasn't here to meet me anymore. And, it was kind of quite a startling experience walking out of that airport. I don't think anything had prepared me for it. And fortunately, the gentleman Ashok that was there to greet me grabbed me by the arm. He said, I know your name's Adrian Mutton, and I'm here to to take you home. And those early days in Delhi, looking around the markets and then going onto Saharanpur, I think have set me up for what's been a very enjoyable and enriching career in India over the last 30 years. Mm-hmm. When I got to Saharanpur, I think the thing that struck me most is the simplicity of life there, first and foremost. So the Joshi family, who've become lifelong friends of mine, had a good school. They were ambitious. And like many Indian families, they were traditionally dressed. They were strict vegetarians. And they had one white ambassador car, which was the pride and joy of the school. And I drove around everywhere in that ambassador, and it was great fun. Of course, these were the very early days of satellite TV, and I remember being in their living room when Star TV kind of finally came to life with the MTV channel, and it was an amazing opportunity for a young 18-year-old from England to just be embedded in a family in a second or third tier city that didn't have the razzmatazz and bells and whistles that come with being in a Mumbai or a Delhi or another major city at that time. Above and beyond recognizing the traditionalist environment that I was in, what struck me is that the teaching I was doing was centered around English and economics. And I realized within the first lesson that most of the students I was teaching economics to were far smarter than I was. Mm-hmm. So I had to spend hours in the evenings doing my homework. I was doing more homework than they were just to be able to prepare for the next lesson. And I just finished doing economics in Oxford, and I realized that if we could one day capture the brains of these Indian youth population and convert them onto the global stage, one would be looking to a bright future. And of course, India's gone on to do that with many of its bright, talented students that have gone across the seas, and today we at Sannam S4 play a big role in that. But that was a big wake-up call for me about how bright the youth were, how inquisitive they were, how much spin they could put on a ball when we were playing cricket. That was quite frightening as well. So it was a wonderful first few months in Saharanpur. And then as the autumn came, I contracted malaria, and I was very, very sick and was taken to a local hospital. And then I saw the other side of India, which was the limited health infrastructure that exists in the country, the types of treatment that are offered to sick people and how it was managed. And it was at that point, very, very early on in my India journey, that I recognized the frailty of society as well from a health perspective. And 30 years later, it's just heartbreaking to see that play out at such scale with the COVID pandemic today. So that was a real wake-up call, and I just recovered from that. The weather was getting better, and I was really starting to get into my stride. And then, of course, in that first week in December, the IOTA disruption began around the Ram Mandir and Babri Masjid, and Saharanpur was a hot pot of violence, of sectarian violence. And from the balcony of my hostel, I could see the violence playing out in front of me. And as an 18-year-old who'd never really seen anything like that, it was very, very scary, I must say. And we were in a walled school compound. Of course, we had guards on the gate protecting the students. We had a mix of both Hindu and Muslim students in the hostel, and so one was always slightly afraid of what was going to happen, with various mobs coming into the school. We had a mixture of staff. All of our canteen staff were Muslims, so it was just, one never knew quite how safe we were in that school. And so that was yet another eye-opener into the tinderbox that India potentially could be. And of course, that was a pretty horrific time for most of northern India. So as the weeks rolled on, I was then given the opportunity to get out of the city. We had a ration pass, being a school with a hostel, and so I trundled off in the White Ambassador. And the headmaster very kindly managed to get me a ticket to get on a train from Saharanpur to Delhi and connect through to Goa, which was what, 2.5 day train journey, I guess. And so we arrived at the station. He dropped me off. He was very, very anxious, of course. I was anxious. And the station was packed because it was a curfew, so people could not get out of the station. So anyone who was arriving couldn't get out. I finally boarded the train through scrapping my way through hundreds of people. In those days, I had long blonde hair. I stood out quite a lot on that platform. And I got on the train, and as the train started pulling out of the station, there were rocks thrown at the train. And it was just the adrenaline pumping through my body was already something I'd never experienced before. As I finally found a seat as the train was gathering pace, I reached down for my money as the chaiwala came round, and I realized my money belt had gone.
Oh.
And I had all my money and my passport in that. No mobile phone, of course, because they weren't even invented in 1992.
Yes, correct.
And no one on the train had the least interest in my concerns when we were having rocks thrown at us and all of this sectarian violence was going on around. So in order to survive, I had, in those days, I think I had about 20 rupees on me and a packet of beedies. And that was my kind of go-to comfort. And so I spoke, in those days, I spoke, good local UP Hindi. And so I had a conversation with the chaiwala, sab chai kitna ka hai, and he's kind of looked at me rather quizzically, and he said, "Yeah, 50 cup hai, cup 2 rupees hai." I said, "Tika." So I offered him 60 rupees, 70 rupee over his asking price for the pot of tea, and he gave me the tea. I put on his little hat, and I started walking down the train, chai, chai, garam chai. And of course, in a highly stressful environment where people are fearing for their lives, they're escaping or running to somewhere, the sight of this long blonde-haired Angrezi walking through the train was just kind of surreal to many. And people would look at me and not know what to say, and they say, "Ha, do cup diddle." And in those days, you used to get the wonderful kula cups, the clay cups. And so I'd have a stack full of those in the silver tray on my other arm. And so I would hand them the cups, and they'd hand me 4 rupees. I say, "Ne, 10 rupiya hai." And they'd be like, "Kya?" And I say, "Ye bahut acha Angrezi chai hai, ek cup 5 rupiya hai." And they're like, "Oh, okay." And they give me 5 rupees. And so I'd keep 2 rupees, obviously, to pay the chaiwala his dues. And so over the next 2.5 days, I sold as much as I could get my hands on. So uncle chips, omelette, cutlet, coffee, peanuts. And I just worked all the way to Goa, just going up and down the train, selling different things. And I had enough money by the time I got to Goa to buy me a few days grace, accommodation, and get a bus to Culver Beach, where I decided to stay, and then ran out of money again, and then had to persuade the local bar, and it was called Tequila on Culver Beach. The owner was Sam Fernandez. I had to persuade him to give me a job for food and lodging, and the one advantage I had was a Discman, which no one had ever seen before. I had some beautiful music to play, and that was it. So for the next few weeks, until my traveler's checks arrived again, until I was able to leave Goa, I was working in a beach bar serving kingfishers at about 18 rupees a bottle, I think it was in those days.
That is really, really, humbling experience, Adrian, I must say. And, I'm sure the audience, and I must share with you that today a lot of college students are listening to you from the Mumbai University and other universities. And I'm sure there is so much of learning from this, apart from the lighter side. But the fact of life is that one must be ready to face life as it comes, and really have the courage to deal with it, to fight with it very courageously, and with lot of conviction and lot of courage, I would say. Um, uh, I'm really touched with your experience, Adrian. I come from a very humble background, but this the kind of work that you did, and the kind of activity that you conducted during to collect money is something which is very incredible, and really, really takes lot and lots of courage, I guess. So, Adrit, from here, from Goa, I guess you continued working very hard, and let me now straight bring you to a Sanam S4. Now, can you tell us about what made you start Sannam S4, and what all Sannam S4 is doing? And first of all, what is this Sannam S4?
Yeah, so Sannam S4 is the name of the company that I founded in 2008. And when I was looking to establish the business, I wanted a name that was ubiquitous in India, that it was in everyday life, but no one quite knew what the name was, and would ask the same question that you've asked, and hopefully never forget the answer. And so working with a marketing executive at the time, she presented a whole bunch of ideas, and the final one was the logo that you see behind me, the big burning globe. And Sannam S4 is actually India's most widely used red chili. It comes from the Guntur province of Andhra Pradesh.
Okay.
And most Indians don't know it. If you ask an Indian to name you a mango, they'll name 10. If you ask them to name an apple, they might be able to say Kashmiri, Himachal, Washington. If you ask them to name a chili, they say red or green. People eat chilies all the time, from masala omelets right through the day. And so the Sannam S4 chili for me was a symbol of being part of an everyday Indian experience. It was the key ingredient to most Indian recipes, and yet it wasn't us that were taking the glory. It was the chefs, and in our case, the chefs are our clients, whether they be universities or corporates or non-profit organizations. And I also loved the imagery because it gave me an excuse. If you come to any of our 5 offices in Delhi, they are emblazoned with pictures of fields in Andhra and bright red chilies, and there's a certain vibrancy that we managed to capture with the name.
Great. So what exactly is the activity of Sannam S4? I mean, what are the areas of work that you do?
Yeah, so let me maybe just kind of put into context why I set the company up, Nitin. So, of course, I had arrived in India in 1992, which was immediately post India's announcement of liberalization.
Yes.
And so the country was trying to get its mind around what that meant. And the father of the principal of the school that I was at was a Bengali communist, and his son was much more of a libertarian, Sudhir. And I remember just being around the kitchen table, just having these discussions about where the economy was going, and how much India should rely on international partners, how much it should be self-sufficient. And of course, over the years, I watched India progress at various paces through the 90s and the early 2000s. And after leaving India in the late 90s through selling a travel company that you referred to that I'd established, I came back a number of years later and went back to Saharanpur. I'd seen obviously the growth in Delhi and Mumbai and was really impressed with what was going on. But I went back to Saharanpur after a few years' absence, and the headmaster, Surya Joshi, picked me up in this brand new Toyota Innova, which had all the lights on it and this, a high definition sound stereo and these wonderful leather seats. And it was just, this kind of luxurious carriage. And he was dressed in jeans. He had a pair of Armani sunglasses and he was carrying a BlackBerry. And I thought, Kiowa, if this is Saharumpa, then everything I'm reading in The Economist is true. India's middle classes are stretching far and wide. And I was just so excited. And in the early days of meeting him, he was a very strict traditionalist, and he was, had all of these investments in bakeries and schools and businesses all over the place. And I thought, right, I must come back to India. And so I then made the plans over the next 15 to 18 months to return to the country. And the opportunity that I saw was based on what I've been doing for the previous 10 years, helping a international technology company really be global. And so my role within that company was to build our international manufacturing footprint, take it from the UK, first to Singapore, then to Taiwan. We opened up distribution and development centers around the world. We opened up sales offices. And that was a really interesting learning experience. I was still very young in those days. And I thought to myself, there must be an easier way to internationalize a company than all of this pain that organizations go through, whether it be HR, tax, governance, etc. And so that was the idea, that recognizing companies were going to come into India in their plane loads, who was really going to look after them? And after quite a lot of research, I felt that there was an opportunity for me to play a role there.
That's really fascinating, Adrian. Now, can we move to the COVID situation? What India has learned to learn from the past successes and failures, and particularly, I would really love to know from you as to how did you shifted Sannam S4's focus during the pandemic?
Yeah, so firstly, I reflect back on those very early days in Saharumpa where I was hospitalized with malaria, and I had first-hand exposure to the medical infrastructure. And I was also a teacher, so I had first-hand experience to India's education system in 30 years ago. And when I look back over those 30 years and I see India's development, I can look at Bandra Kurla complex in Mumbai, I can look at Gurugram in Haryana, I can look at what's going on in the satellite cities around most of the major metropolis, and you can see and feel that development. You've obviously got the wealth, you've got some of the most successful entrepreneurs around the world. But when I look back at where India was 30 years ago vis-a-vis its healthcare and education, yes, there have been some wonderful success stories. There are some fabulous healthcare companies, Fortis and Max and Apollo, of course, yeah. And there are some wonderful schools. The IITs have produced some of the brightest people on the planet, without doubt. There are some fabulous private universities now. But when I go back to second and third tier cities, which I often do when I'm in India, and I go into those hospitals because I'm taking a medical company from the USA or the United Kingdom, or I'm going into a school with an international university or K-12 provider that's looking to be active, it isn't a quantum leap of progress. And I feel that India's healthcare and education system, despite tremendous brain power, despite tremendous goodwill, has not yet caught up with India's development agenda. And there's a role for all of us to play in making sure that this is the wake-up call that everyone needed.
Yes.
And so through the pandemic, what Sannam S4 has done has doubled down on its efforts to ensure that we are serving India's education community as effectively as possible by bringing in world-class technology that can enable a combination of on-campus and remote learning. So hybrid learning can be deployed, or through the cases of many lockdowns, full remote learning is effective and efficient. We've been bringing in many universities who are talking about transnational education opportunities with domestic universities for that idea, knowledge and teaching exchange, which is absolutely vital. We're looking at ways of accelerating international universities' research agenda in India. One of the big issues that we've been advocating for reform on is India's FCRA Act, Foreign Contributions Regulations Act. And we've been saying for years and years and years, this is a problem. And now it's a big problem.
Yes.
And so we're doing all we can to leverage the tremendous willingness that the international education community has at all levels to be a partner to India in its development agenda. And that's not to sacrifice India's own nationalist ideals or its own religious ideals, but it's to bring the best of what India has, take what the best of the world has, and create India's own version of international higher education. So that's one thing, and we're spending a lot of time, effort, and money on that agenda. The second area that we're focusing on is ensuring that the non-profit organizations internationally who are already struggling to do the work that they wanted to in India, perhaps because of FCRA, perhaps because of the time it takes to be a qualified recipient of donations in India, because of the regulations, because of their inability to travel to the country at the moment. We're doing all we can, not just with COVID focus. And in fact, we've put $100,000 of our own money into our own COVID program, plus we're raising another $100,000 with our partners and clients. But there are all these other programs that we are naturally supporting in areas of malaria, child welfare, gender and development, innovation and entrepreneurship, other areas of healthcare. And so we want to make sure that the international research collaboration does not slow down through the pandemic. And then the third area, which is absolutely critical, and has been something that we've been working very closely with the government of India on over the years, is bringing foreign investors into the country so that we can create jobs. We're very proud at Sannam S4 that in the year prior to the pandemic, we brought in just over $1 billion of investment into India through international clients. And those companies are creating hundreds and thousands of jobs. Absolutely. And as they create jobs, we're creating jobs. We, as you said in your introduction, we increased our workforce 20% through the pandemic. 63% of our workforce is female. So we want to see more of this. And if ever there is a time for job creation in India, it's going to be in the next 5 to 10 years, particularly with the demographic curve shaped the way it is with India's young population. And so we feel a sense of responsibility working with India to drive as much investment and job creation opportunity over the next 5 to 10 years as we possibly can.
I can only just thank you on behalf of the country, Adrian. One most interesting observation that I have here, Adrian, is that you were a teacher, and it only demonstrates as to what a teacher can do. We have a huge number of teachers, whether it is primary school, secondary, or college. And I'm sure your success story, your whole trajectory is going to be like a classic playbook for the teacher community. Now, Adrian, India's population is young compared to that of US and Europe. Now, what do you think are the most important needs of India's young people, and how best can they be met, considering the fact that one teacher, a 19-year-old boy coming from Oxford to India, and creates such a huge empire and has such a huge impact on India?
Yeah, I look at myself as an 18-year-old coming to India, and fortunately, I was blessed with being the son of two parents who themselves were entrepreneurs. And so every week they had to work to put food and drink on the table and to pay the school fees, to try and give myself and my two sisters the best education we could get. And so that there was never a safety net in our family. And in fact, both my sisters have gone on to be entrepreneurs, as have I, of course. And so we are a family that knows that every week, every month, you have to work to earn the income to survive. And historically in India, the prize jobs were the government jobs. I want my son or daughter to get government job, or I want them to become an engineer, or I want them to be, working for the doctor. Yeah, because these are, as soon as you've qualified, you've got a job for life. Okay, and that was rightly so after being a parent, which I now am, with three wonderful young children who, by the way, were all born in Delhi in the 2000s. One recognizes that you want your children to be comfortable and just in a job, but those jobs these days are not going to be the ones that solely get India, fulfill India's true potential. And so to answer to your question, I see this through young staff we're bringing in, one has to give India's young population the opportunity to be the best possible version of they can, in whatever shape or form that is, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in music, whether it's in, of course, all of the high growth technology companies that are there. The number of startups in India now, and the people that are leaving university and telling their parents, I'm not going to university, or if I go to university, I'm not going to go into an accountancy or a government job or a healthcare. I want to be an entrepreneur. For parents, that's still, oh my goodness, I never had. I'm sure it's like with your children, you never had the chance of kind of choosing that path as much as they do today. And I think that has to be encouraged. And I'm also a strong believer of the benefit I had as a young person of going overseas, in my case, India, and experiencing a different culture. And then everywhere I've been in the world, and I've been lucky enough to live all over the world over the last 30 years, been involved in some fabulous businesses. I say to everyone, I grew up in UP. I grew up in Saharanpur. That's where my roots are. That's what defined me as a young man. It was the first time I'd left home, and my first home was Saharanpur as an adult. And so when I look back at children now who are seeking to study overseas, certainly at Sannam S4, we're doing everything we possibly can to give young Indians that opportunity. But I'm also a big advocate, and a rare one in the international education community, to say, get them back on a plane after they've graduated.
Get them back in India.
And get them back in India, because I want the intellectual property of the next 6G technology, or the next great app, or the next great piece of military hardware to come from an Indian in India. And there are some fantastic ambassadors for India overseas, whether they're running Adobe, whether they're running Microsoft, whether they're in Dranoy's case in Pepsi, and they are absolutely to be celebrated. But the intellectual property and the value of the mind power that Indian young people bring has to be captured in India. There's already enough money, enough wealth in Silicon Valley. And that mobility has got to be fostered and encouraged. And India's got to create the environment. And this by and large does kind of come with big government policy, also comes with kind of the finances and the funds below them in the private sector. But you've got to make it a conducive environment for an entrepreneur to want to come into the country and try their luck, as opposed to saying, well, it's easy to set up a company in Silicon Valley, it's easy to set up a company in London, so I'm just going to stay here. Whilst I highly encourage that collaboration, I would be looking, if I were the government of India, on ways of really bringing those bright young Indians back.
That's happening actually, and that's happening in a bigger way, but maybe it differs in slight degree. But here, Adrian, I would sincerely urge you to please address the parents of India, parents of these children. What advice would you give to the parents of these children?
Yeah, I give all this advice now as a parent, so I feel a little bit more qualified. And yeah, my parents were like any other parent. Firstly, they were scared of sending me to university. I wanted to go to university. They didn't want me to go to university. And it was actually my sixth form tutor at school who convinced my parents that I should go to university. Their argument was he has to learn a skill. He has to become a tradesman. So he's always got his hands to work with, whether it be a plumber or, you know, a carpenter or something, because they didn't understand what skill going to university was going to give me to be able to earn my money every week and every month. And so they were firstly scared that I wanted to go to university, and then secondly, I drop it, you know, one morning over the breakfast table that I'm off to India on this on this teaching place to Saharanpur. And of course, apart from the world map that we had in the house, there's no other way of finding out anything. We couldn't Google it.
There was no Google at that time.
No computer. We didn't have a computer in the family, so they're just like, where are you going, and what you know, what, how are we going to contact you? And so from personal experience, Nitin, what my parents have always done is say, if you have really thought this through, if you've got at least an understanding of the risks and the opportunity, and you're able to articulate that to us, we will support you 100%. And if you walk out of this door and you succeed, we'll be the proudest parents you can ever imagine. If you fail, we'll still be the proudest parents, because you had the guts to go out there and try it. And so whatever you do, we'll either be there with a safety net for you to fall on or a champagne bottle to celebrate with you. So, you know, off you go. And they've just given me that opportunity to explore, to travel, and to take a step further into the unknown that I think many parents don't allow their children to take. And I would encourage all parents to be like mine and just let their child take that extra one or two steps that they really do feel naturally anxious about.
I must share a very little personal experience. When I was studying in my 10th standard, 11th standard or something, and my father was a typewriter mechanic, you know, very senior mechanic in India, and he asked me, why don't you learn typing, you know, as a skill? And well, I said, I don't see a reason, because I wanted to become a lawyer. He said, no, but that skill will still help you. And trust me, you know, though, you know, when I became a lawyer at that time in 92, 93, when the computers came, you know, I was the fastest on the keyboard, because I had learned that skill of typing. So what you're saying is right. You know, we must, as parents, so we must encourage our children to get skills, whatever that skill is, you know, rather than just going for a degree education. Okay. Also, I must share one small incident here. You know, my son, when he was completing his chartered accountancy, he failed, and he was very dejected. And I said, no, why should you feel dejected? Failure is something which you must learn in life. And I gifted him a car because he failed. And I said, look, I'm gifting you a car because you failed, and because I want you to learn how to deal with failures. Anyway, moving on from there, Adrian, it's very interesting, you know, piece that you shared with personal piece that you shared with us. Thanks for that. Now, you know, there's one other area where I want you to really dwell upon a little bit more, because you have such a great experience of India. It is well documented, Adrian, that the fact that educating and empowering women is one of the most effective approaches to lifting families out of poverty. You know, so what policies and measures could you feel should you put in place in India to help women realize their potential? And particularly, you know, in India, we really need to work on this area. So, and what can the business community do to help this?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one that takes me back to the early 90s when I was working with the Slum and Jhuggi Jhopri department of DDA, and I was working with the Mahila Mandals in these Jhuggi dwelling sites, and what struck me is how busy, entrepreneurial and active the women were. They were never sitting still.
Yes.
And they were always doing something, knitting putting a basket together, or they were, sewing some clothes, or they were always feeding the children, going off to fetch the water. As archaic as that sounds, there was only one water pump amongst tens of thousands of people, so they would go off, fetch the water, bring it back. And I remember, and then one day I'd love to have the time to write a story about this, but I remember sitting with the dons of the slum, and we would sit there and we would relax with a triple X rum, and we would just be kind of talking about the slum and how it runs and how the political vote base goes and so on. And the luxury of time that the men had seemed to be totally disproportionate to the women, who were just kind of constantly running around. And as we hit the pandemic last year, what struck me is how much of a disproportionate burden was placed on women through the pandemic. And we employ, as I said, 63% women at Sannam S4, something we're very proud of, and continuing to invest in female leadership development programs, flexi work, giving women opportunity who don't want a full-time job but still want to be economically active and independent and stimulated. And so I noticed firsthand, because I spoke to every single member of our staff personally through the pandemic last year. And what I saw is that the women who work for us are usually coming to the office at 8-9 o'clock in the morning, having dropped the children off, got tea ready for auntie, cooked the breakfast, made sure everything was clean, and then left. And then occasionally they'll be called up because the child's sick at school or there's some problem, and they'll be dashing home, dashing back to the office. They finish at 5:30, day's done, and then they go back home, and then they're kind of commander-in-chief of the household again to make sure that the husband and everyone else is happy in the evening. And on one particular Zoom call I was on with a staff member of mine, and she was there very smartly presented because she was talking to the CEO. And I was talking to her, it was first thing in the morning, India time. And this elderly lady came in behind her and said, "Mera chai kahan hai?" And she's like, "Auntie Ji, I'm on the phone to my CEO." She's like, "Mera chai kahan hai?" And then my staff member's like, no, I'm on the phone, Auntie. She said, "Oh, who is it?" And so she said, "No, it's my CEO." CEO? What is CEO? And so there was no respect for this woman's career. The fact that she's on the work call in the morning, her first priority for that family is to get the house organized first thing in the morning. And in this case, I'd obviously set a call up right in the middle of kind of, morning prep time. And I saw so many examples of where our staff members, female staff members, are having to juggle domestic chores, which they never did before because they always had domestic support, grocery purchasing, which was always done by someone else, cooking, the schooling for the children, which of course all of us internationally have had to go through that burden. But there were just so many additional expectations that were placed on women. And us men say, yeah, we'll help, and we do a dish here, a dish there, or whatever, but very often the men's work always seems more important than the women's. And in the case of many, if not most of my staff, I know that they are, that they are equally successful as and busy and have a role to play economically than their husbands do. And so I think this is a worldwide issue, Nitin, through the pandemic that has been shot up, but it was particularly stark in India, and we've had to build in quite a lot of additional pastoral care to ensure that those women are, from our perspective, where we can as a business, given a little bit of extra space to manage those domestic affairs in a way that I just think with the pace of the pandemic, with how it's all played out, no one's just really given a voice to them. And if you look on the political stage in India, who is really out there lobbying for women. It's just not happening. There isn't a strong enough voice politically that's supporting women through the pandemic, and I think that's something that that hopefully will be one of the lessons that is learned through this dreadful period that we're all experiencing.
Yes, you are very true. Very, very true, Adrian. You are now located in Washington, D.C. I mean, what do you miss most about living in India? I mean, could you please share? You have shared so many fantastic memories, but still, some fondest memory?
Yeah, you know, people often ask me why I'm so fixated with India. Why after 30 years is it still the heartbeat of my business and social activity? And every time I get a spare minute outside of work, I'm listening to a podcast, The Seen or the Unseen, or Grand Tamasha, or a daily catch up from the Hindustan Times. So albeit I'm away, I've tried to be as connected as possible. But the answer I give to those people is I have never, ever gone home from work when I was in the 11 years I lived in India on Indian soil. I never went home feeling like I had the same day twice. And a lot of my friends in London complain about the commute back and forth to work and just doing more of the same. And I feel like a change. I have never once felt like that. Every drive to the office, every trip to a different city, every weekend away just felt like a magical adventure to me. And I miss that stimulation, that diversity. I just really do. Of course, I miss my Indian friends and my colleagues, because we're a very close team, and Zoom has been helpful, but it's not a substitute for just spending time with each other. And I'm a big Indian foodie, so I've spent far too much money importing papad and pickle and bel puri and all sorts of things from India that keep arriving through the post. And my wife is kind of now just resigned to the fact that our fridge is going to look like the fridge of a restaurant in the Taj in Delhi.
Great. One message, Adrian, you would have for India from Washington?
Look, I've been through 30 years of India's recent history, and India's been my primary interest. So I could tell you more about the political landscape, economic landscape, social landscape of India than any other country in the world. I've seen the iota disturbance, the sectarian violence. I've saw obviously the back end of the financial crisis that was addressed through the liberalization in 1991. I was in India when the 1998 nuclear missile tests with Pakistan brought the country to near war. I've seen the China disputes on the border. I was in India when the Mumbai terror attacks happened, and I was, I had a number of clients in Mumbai at that time, and I've been there through floods, through storms. I've seen pestilence. I was in a Saharapur market when this giant swarm of locusts came through and just destroyed the whole market in seconds. So I've seen India face these challenges, and on every occasion, it has arisen stronger. This is the toughest situation India has faced, certainly in the 30 years that I've been involved in the country. But I know India will emerge a stronger civilization and a stronger country. What I hope, Nitin, is that this is the opportunity, the really one big opportunity for everyone, including those of us that play a role in India's development internationally, are honest about where the priorities should be over the next 10 years. And are not just looking at the skyscrapers of Mumbai or Delhi or Hyderabad or Bangalore, but we're looking at education. We're looking at healthcare infrastructure. We're looking at the foundations of Indian society that have to be rock solid for the metaphorical equivalent of India's skyscraper civilization to really stand strong. And it's difficult to see the wood from the trees at the moment because there's so much political finger pointing, state versus centre, BJP versus Congress-led states. I understand all of that, but one has a responsibility, all of us have a responsibility of sitting down at some point, God willing, as soon as possible, as this pandemic is brought under control in India, and saying, what can we learn from this last 18-month period, and how do we build India back stronger? And it will grow stronger. It's just a question of how strong, how prominent, and we all have a responsibility in contributing towards that journey.
Adrian, I just cannot thank you enough. I'm for the first time in my 20-hour talks, I'm feeling loss of words to thank you for the incredible, passionate work that you have done in India. Every word that you speak, every breath that you take, it speaks about India and its well-being. And we all Indians are highly indebted to you. I'm personally very thankful to you for your valuable time, your insights, and your commitment towards India. And I really look forward for many such interactions with you and learning from you more as to how I can still give back to my country. Let me conclude this talk with a humble prayer to the Almighty, bestow mankind with the right spirit to fight the coronavirus and help restore prosperity and well-being. Thank you, Adrian, once again. Highly appreciate your time.
Thank you, Nitin. It's been a great pleasure. And I feel particularly honoured that this is your anniversary edition, I believe. So congratulations on a year of India Power Talk. I've been following it with great interest, and I was delighted and honoured to be invited to spend this hour with you. Thank you very much, and best wishes to you and all of those in India who are watching. You will all emerge from this stronger. I'm 100% confident about that.
Thank you, Adrian.